A world where God sometimes does wrong things means a world where God can make mistakes or act unfairly, just like humans sometimes do. A world where God is always right means God never makes mistakes and everything he does is always good and perfect. In a situation where let's do some premise setting first in order to have a clean debate. The first thing we have to figure out is the agreed assumptions in both of these words. The first assumption is what is right or not is subjective. Should you erase history so that future generations can live in more peace? Should we let people sell their own body for money? Should abortions be legal? Is it okay to be gay? These situations don't have a clear moral right nor wrong. This is exactly why we have rigorous debates to measure what we should do. The second assumption is if God is perfect and always right, whatever God chooses will become always right. This word probably look something like people following the Bible as the words of truth, not questioning the words of God and not being allowed to challenge the words of God. And the third assumption is humans no longer become the deciders of deciding what is right or wrong. This means humans would not value critical thinking and debate as much. Because what is the point if God just decides everything? The final assumption is even if God is perfect in their words, humans are not. So humans can misunderstand the message of God. This happens all the time in religions where God is perfect. For example, in Christianity, where God is assumed to be perfect, people have constant disagreements about what God meant. This is why many churches have disagreements about whether God wants us to accept and love gay people or to think of them as sinners. Now to move on to the government's argument. The government's first argument is God's words become easily abusable from powerful leaders. Many religions have shamans, popes, or religious leaders, people who exist as a messenger of God. This gives these people unquestionable rights to say their word is God's word. This is dangerous because the worst religion leaders can completely abuse their power to take advantage of people. In the worst case, religious leaders make people give burdensome amounts of money to the church, sell their bodies to the church, or do things that are easily really for the religious leaders instead of God. People completely lose their freedom. Gay people get stoned in Saudi Arabia, and cult leaders justify mass suicide. Realistically, good intended people would still misinterpret the words of God. This is probably like people having a hard figuring out if God told them it is a sin to get an abortion or not. When people are unsure, they are incentivized to be more conservative and decide
You know
not to.
why?
Yes.
If God was always right, wouldn't he make a reasonable decision because that would lead to the betterment of humanity?
Well, God is a place where it's not like everyone is perfect. It's not like God is even perfect. Even though God is like a God, they still make mistakes. Not to carry on. Realistically, good and this is probably like people having a hard figuring out if God told them it is a sin to get an abortion or not. When people are unsure, they are incentivized to be more conservative and decide not to allow abortions as the risk is going to hell. This leads to people's rights to bodily autonomy, even if God never intended them to. Even in the best case scenario where God is absolutely clear with their message and humans never misinterpret God and God never has a weird and confusing statements like gay people deserve to die and only make the absolute clearest rules, human would still lose the fundamental human dignity, which is personal agency. If humans lose the ability to decide right from wrong, we lose our ability to create our own meaning in life. The purpose of our life becomes about worshiping God and following God's commands. Thus, I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Panel, when life feels unfair, people often say, God knows what he's doing. That sentence alone captures what our side stands for. We would rather live in a world where God is always right, because a perfect God gives people hope and direction, something no flawed deity could ever offer. Greetings to the house at large. I'm the first speaker, and I'll do framing, definitions and set up one argument and then close. Before I do that, I would like to rebut the main point that came out of Sai Proposition's first speaker. So proposition talks about how God has this moral truth which is fixed, and like what happens is that they have these beliefs which is not good and exclude certain communities like the LGBTQ. What the proposition is confusing here is not God's perfection, but the human interpretation of God's word. The problem isn't that God is always right, it's that humans sometimes misunderstand what God truly means. For example, right now some Christians believe that being LGBTQ is something that Jesus would not want, while on the other hand, other Christians believe that it's completely fine to be LGBTQ. It's the way you interpret it. While on the our side of the world, we stand for a world where God is turned for comfort. Now I'm going to move on to framing. This debate isn't about religion itself. It's about what kind of God creates a world where humans can live better lives. In the proposition's world, God sometimes does wrong things. That means humans must constantly question divine actions, doubt their faith, and live in confusion about what's truly good. Let us remind ourselves why the concept of God was actually created, so that humans could find comfort. Now, when they question this comfort, they feel that they have nothing to turn to when their family member passes away, for example, when they're going through something. So this creates a feeling of uncertainty, and instability for humans. In our world where God is always right, people find peace in knowing that even when they don't understand something, there is purpose behind it. Faith becomes a source of emotional strength and not frustration. So the question for today is, should faith comfort humanity or confuse it? We believe the best world is one where faith comforts, and that only happens where God is always right. Now I'm going to move on to definitions and setup. So what does a world where God is always right look like? It basically means every action or decision by God is perfect, fair, and even if humans cannot see it immediately. Secondly, a world where God sometimes does wrong things means God is fallible. He can make mistakes or act unfairly. So our burden today is that the burden on the other side is that the proposition must show that uncertainty and divine errors somehow improve human life, and we, the opposition, must show that divine perfection gives people emotional strength and purpose and stability, which matter more in the real world. I'm now going to present one argument which talks about the real purpose of God. The entire concept of God was created to reassure humanity, to remind us that our pain and struggle are not meaningless. A perfect, always right God gives people comfort and motivation to continue even in the darkest moments. So throughout history, people have turned to faith not because God is relatable, because he is reliable. When humans fail, they look to something higher, something that simply cannot fail. That belief gives them emotional security, the idea that there's order in chaos and there's purpose in suffering and justice in the end. In the propositions world where God can make mistakes, that reassurance disappears. When tragedy strikes, people won't find comfort in prayer anymore. They'll wonder if God messed up again. Faith loses its role as a safe space. Instead of helping people heal, religion becomes a source of confusion and disappointment. So this is not just about faith, and the impact is that it's about survival. A perfect God tells people when life feels uncontrollable. When without that anchor that God gives, despair replaces hope, that tiny hope that every human clings on to every day that keeps them going. Our world where God is always right protects humanity's mental and moral stability. Yeah, sure. This creates freedom to question and think, but that freedom comes at a cost. Losing stability and constantly struggling and always losing hope in small things, which creates problems for the mind itself. So for all those reasons, I'm so proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
The opposition claims that people can trust God only if God is perfect. But we must ask, is that really trust or something else entirely? In a world where God is always perfect, humans do not experience trust. They experience shame and fear. Every mistake, no matter how small, becomes magnified when compared to a perfect being. People hide their errors and are afraid to admit mistakes and avoid trying to fix problems. They do not act out understanding or genuine trust. They act out of fear. This is not trust. This is a relationship built on shame. The impact extends beyond individuals. When bad things happen, people blame themselves or claim it's God's will, taking no action to correct the problem. Mistakes are hidden, discusses are silenced, and human responsibility disappears. A perfect God does not foster trust. It fosters passivity and guilt.
In contrast, in a world where God sometimes does wrong, in human recognize imperfection and take responsibility, they learn from mistake, act to correct injustice, and strive to improve the world. Trust develops through engagement, accountability, and action, not fear. People are empowered rather than paralyzed by guilt. Therefore, opposition's argument that perfection builds trust is misleading. In reality, it builds shame. Our position supports a world where humans take responsibility, learn, and grow. True trust emerges through understanding and action, not through fear or perfection. And in a world where God and opposition claims that people can trust God only if God is perfect, and I rebutted that this is absolutely not true. Now, moving on to my arguments. We stand for this motion. We rather live in a world where God sometimes does wrong things. Why? Because humans, not a perfect being, should decide what is right and wrong in this world. First, in a world where God is already always perfect, people step and try and stop trying to fix problems. If everything is perfect and all mistakes are judged against God's perfection, only any human error becomes shameful. Compared to a perfect being, no, thank you. We are immoral. And when we do something wrong, we hide it. We fear God's judgment. We don't admit our mistakes. We don't learn from them. And we don't try to make the world better. And second, when something bad happens, people say, this is God's will. And just like that, they stop trying to fix it. They accept injustice, suffering, and wrongdoing as something divine. Good deeds are seen as God's reward. Bad deeds is our fault. And this creates a society of fear and constant shame, where people obsess over their own mistakes and criticize themselves endlessly. Human responsibility disappears, replaced by blind obedience. Now, imagine a world where God sometimes does wrong. In that world, human understands that even perfection can fail. People are motivated to act, to correct mistakes, and to improve the world. And because of the responsibility lies with us, we learn from our errors, we debate, we question, and we fix problems instead of hiding from them. Human agency thrives, accountability grows, and most importantly, we grow as moral beings instead of living under endless shame. So in conclusion, a world where God sometimes does wrong things allowed humans to decide the truth, to take responsibility, and to strive for a better world. A perfect, always right God leaves us powerless and trapped in fear. We prefer a world where humans not gods, a world we can learn, improve, and live with purpose. Thank you.
Proposition comes here with a good principle from their first argument by their first speaker. But how do we know this principle is correct? If God is wrong, how do we know that this principle is correct? By debating about it. Panel, no, that does not work. Then that's just not feasible. Panel, I'm the second speaker of opposition, and I'll be doing a few things in my debate. I'll be doing rebuttals, rebuilding, and then I'll give two unique arguments onto some rebuttals. The proposition has missed the whole point of what God is and what he looks like, right? Panel, God is not a ruthless dictator who's trying to ruin life at earth. The proposition says that what is right is subjective and that everyone has their own idea of good and bad. But that's exactly why we need a perfect God, right, man? Because human morality changes over time with culture and opinion and time. And the one person who you go to when you need to know that something is right is God, and that's why he needs to be right. God's perfection doesn't mean that he ignores complexity. It means that he sees the full picture with intentions and consequences. And if God could be wrong, then morality would have no foundation. So how can the proposition come here and try to talk about that panel? Okay, so if God could be wrong, then morality, the side proposition talks about how supporting God is based on fear, but fear implies uncertainty. But our God removes this uncertainty panel. Fear happens when you don't know what will happen, but in our world, God is always right, so outcomes are predictable and fair in the long run panel. Okay, they repeatedly call God, when we call God perfect, they repeatedly called it unfeasible panel. No comments, it's in the motion itself. Okay, they say that people follow God because they fear punishment, but But that only makes sense if punishment is random or unfair. In a world where God is right, it's not. So his justice is predictable and deserved, panel. Okay, on to some rebuilding. They did not rebuild or rebut our first speaker that much, and after they did not retake their argument after our first speaker rebutted it. That means that they've dropped it, and our first argument still stands because they've not been able to rebut that successfully. So on to my two arguments. I'll be doing two. One on karma requires divine perfection. Onto that. Okay, karma, the belief that every action has consequences, can only function in a world where God never has errors, panel, because karma is the moral backbone of human life. It ensures that our choices matter, that goodness has weight, and that evil cannot ultimately prevail, panel. Okay, a perfect God guarantees moral consistency and that every action, seen or unseen, will rightfully have consequences, panel. Even if when life feels unfair, people can trust that there is meaningful struggle, and this can give people hope, knowing that, okay, something bad happens, but the people who are doing it are getting grief and reassured. And when this is done in the correct way, it can actually teach them that no, this is wrong, and that God, the greatest God, does not want me to do this. The divine power does not. Okay, so karma is. So a perfect God guarantees this moral consistency, and this will obviously better the world. This brings to my second argument of uh about how imperfect divinity erases moral accountability, panel. If God can do wrong, humans will believe that wrongdoings are exclusivity, and morality will lose its authority, panel. Okay, a few reasons for this. When people see God as flawless and they have the moral compass to look up to, oh, that's my goal. I want to be a perfect human who can accomplish something like this, who can be so good and make correct decisions and be integral and hold up integrity. But if can make mistakes, then morality becomes a matter of convenience, right? If God can be inspired, so can I, panel. And that's what people will say. That belief removes accountability and weakens conscience itself, and that erodes justice from within. A perfect God does not suppress free will. He defines it, panel, and he gives people moral framework. Within this, their choices that have meaning, and imperfection is divinity. That would cancel the difference between wrong and right, and that society cannot tell the difference without surviving law. Okay, the importance of this is that divinity perfection gives us this moral responsibility. It holds people to higher standards and prevent moral chaos, right? A world where God can be wrong may look freer, but in truth it's a world without guidance, without purpose, and without the faith in goodness itself, panel. So at the end of the day, when God is always right, karma is just, morality is steady, and humanity has hope. But when God can do wrong, truth becomes temporary, and goodness loses its ground. And if God isn't always right, then nothing truly ever is, panel. Thank you. That's why we're so proud to oppose this motion.
We are debating under the motion this house would rather live in a world where God does sometimes wrong things than in a world where God is always right. Our team explained that God's words become easily abusable by powerful leaders, and also people don't try to fix problems in the world because they only think about God's will. But the opposition side is just saying that if God is perfect, then we can depend on them. If God is perfect, it's good. They're only repeating this sentence. Let me present two clashes to prove why our team takes this debate home. First clash: which side creates more religious abuse? Government side, which is our side, mentioned that if God is imperfect, we can debate God. And human, but if we can't debate God, human never question or improve anything. But when people decide morally, then it's very good. And if God is always right, human never question or improve anything. But when people decide morally, they debate and test ideas and correct wrong ones. And that process, learning from mistakes, is what makes decision wiser over time. For example, for centuries, humans thought women couldn't vote. Once people started questioning and debating what's right, then society realized that that was unfair and changed it. If we only followed divine rules without questioning, that injustice would stay forever. And also, but the opposition mentioned that if God is perfect, we can depend on them. But this trust is on shame. If you're, for example, if your family died, then you will think that God made this punishment because God is always right and God is perfect because they made a punishment on me because I did something bad. So they will never try to fix those problems. They will just find their shame inside. The second clash is which side will people live in a happier world? Our side mentioned that we can choose our thing in our side, and if we don't, but in opposition side, if we don't like obey God, then people will think to they will go to when they die, then they will go to meet the devils and stuff, and they will not go to the heaven. And opposition said we can trust God when God is perfect.
Why?
And God is perfect, but when God is similar to us, then it equals happiness. And if the God is not perfect relationship, then it can have relationship with gods. Certainty is good. All the rules, all the rules decisions depend on God, so it becomes meaningless and no freedom, and it will be miserable in their side. And also, why we should morally change is that morality should serve people. And when people debate to figure out what should be right, they are given the power to choose the right. That will give the people the most amount of happiness. When people don't have this power, they have to blindly follow rules they don't understand why. So this is why our team takes this debate home. Thank you.
Propositions say that when someone loses a family member, people think God is punishing them. But that misunderstands faith. In our world, God being always right doesn't mean every tragedy is your fault. It means it has a purpose beyond what we see. That belief gives people comfort and closure. In their world where God can make mistakes, your loved one death could just be an accident made by God. That's far more painful. There God might act without any reason, but on our side, God actually upholds karma. Panel, that's why we win this debate. A few things in my speech today. First of all, I'll tell you the stakeholders and I'll show you how the stakeholders are benefited on our side. I'll give some clarifications in this debate, and then I'll move on to clash analysis and show you how we win on the two main clashes that came out today. Panel, stakeholders in this debate are those who are seeking hope, those who fear the chaos that is happening in their lives, and societies who need certainty to thrive. A few clarifications in this debate. Panel proposition claims that their God is more relatable, but ignores the risk that people may become arrogant or lose respect for spiritual authority. Panel, on our side, when someone is doing something wrong, they get punished for it. And their whole thing about free will is just simply untrue. They keep talking about free will again and again, and they think we've not been addressing it at all. But panel, in Hinduism, we think that God is almost always right. We think that God is always right. But I'm here today of my free will. God has not given us a message about man-made things like debates about gods. The proposition argues that perfect God's message on complex issues like LGBTQ plus rights or abortion may be misunderstood, but this confusion arises from human error, not from any imperfection in the divine message. So how is that God's fault? Because even if it is, at least we're having more benefit about the other things that are important in this debate. Panel, this looks like the God in their world not being able to exercise karma for a serial killer who has killed so many people, and they don't kill the serial killer even though he's done the wrong thing, but this is teaching the wrong moral values. This is punishing this is not punishing people even when it's their fault, even when they're doing something that's so wrong. Even if you don't take any of this, proposition hasn't shown how it's better on their side. Their case is basically not exclusive. What they try to argue on us just happens on their side, just even worse. Now, a few clashes in this debate. First of all, which side better ensures maximum good stability and lasting societal benefit? Panel, this debate is we define, as we told you, we define right as something that has the best that gives the humans the best like amount of returns. It makes sure that people who are doing the wrong thing are punished. It makes sure that people who are doing the right thing are benefited for their deeds. So their argument about people not working also doesn't stand, because people have to work, because that's the way because they think that's how God rewards them, and that's really true. If God is always right, more lives are held, tragedies are prevented, and peace is actually. And that's the reason people have always wanted their God to be perfect, and they believe their God is perfect, not to disconnect, but to trust and be inspired. Our impacts, which are justice, hope, and genuine stability, are stronger and longer lasting than what the proposition can offer for trust, dignity, and true order word proposition. With that, I'd like to rest my case and on my stance. Thank you.
Panel, this debate is not just about theory, but in fact, it's about which world gives humanity more peace. You should judge this round on who better protects human faith and stability in the long term. There are two key clashes in this debate. Firstly, faith versus confusion, and secondly, moral growth. Which side practices moral growth better? Let me start with the first part of contention. Firstly, faith versus confusion. The proposition's world sounds interesting, but it's dangerous. A world where God can make mistakes is one where faith collapses. When people no longer trust that God is right, religion stops being a source of comfort and becomes a source of doubt. Our world, where God is always right, gives people reassurance in chaos. The belief that there's meaning even when life's unfair. That emotional security is what keeps humanity going on. Secondly, moral growth. They say like imperfection helps humans think, but moral questioning does not require God to fail. It requires humans to reflect. So what they basically paint as God's fault, for example, excluding the LGBTQ community, is simply the matter of judgment from a human interpretation. For example, like I gave in my first speaker speech, I told you that some Christians think that being LGBTQ is fine while others don't, right? Because that's how humans interpret it. So not really exactly God's fault. God just judges what you do with your morals and what you do with your values, which you get on our side of the world better, because on their side, when God makes mistakes, and sometimes maybe if a person is really kind, but they can have an unfair judgment against them. Maybe they did one wrong thing in their whole life, but still got punished like really severely for that. That's the harm you get on their side of the world, while that harm does not even exist on our side, because we simply believe that having a God that's always right and fair and just is something that's really important in this debate. So secondly, moral growth. They say perfection helps humans think, but moral questioning does not require God to fail. And yeah, so at the end of this debate, the choice is clear. In their world, faith shatters where God falters. In ours, faith holds people together, guiding them through pain and uncertainty. That's why the opposition is proud to defend a world where God is always right, as only a perfect God can keep imperfect humans strong. Thank you very much.
The opposition argues that if God is not perfect, people will not believe in God. Their best case is that people don't feel shame when bad things happen. But even in their best case, they lose. Why? Because trust without responsibility is hollow. People may feel no shame, but they also have no motivation to act, no reason to correct injustice, and no moral growth. A world without accountability is a world without progress. And even if God were perfect, humans would still struggle to understand God's intentions. People do not truly know what God actually meant. This is the best case scenario under their own argument. The worst case scenario is even more damaging. Leaders of powerful individuals can claim anything is by God to silence others, manipulate society, or justify harmful actions, and people cannot question it. And when everything is attributed to divine will, people will stop trying to fix problems. Humans' responsibility disappears, and society becomes passive. Moreover, the prime minister of opposition did not but our Prime Minister's arguments. We clearly show that humans must decide the truth, and yet opposition avoided addressing the critical point that blind faith is a perfect God discourages action than moral reasoning. And even in their own frame, whether God is perfect or imperfect, belief alone does not guarantee moral or social progress. The real danger is using God's words as an excuse. By contrast, when humans take responsibility, we learn from mistakes, act to correct injustice, and grow morally. In conclusion, their best case, no shame, does not solve the problem, and our stance remains. Humans should decide the truth, and even if God is perfect, humans are not perfect. Humans have an agency. We are the ones that should decide our own life and future. Thank you.